Emotional storytelling is very important for us because we humans are story animals. We consume stories, we talk about things in the form of stories, and we remember things in the form of stories. We start telling each other about stories before we could even write. When you create an entertainment experience, when you create an art piece, you want it to be remembered, you want it to be told to more people. The best way to make people remember your game is to create a strong story. It stays in their memory longer and has bigger impact. So it is almost the most important thing when you're thinking about making a video game.
Games some years ago were really focused on mechanics exclusively, and people just wanted to test their skills. And I think the more it goes, the more people need a reason to fight or to shoot, and the story is that reason. So it's also interesting to see that games with a good story, with a good narrative in general, are the games that have the higher completion rate. People want to know what's going to happen, and they want to see the end of the story, and that's what really keeps them playing until the end.
I can remember this rather profound moment when I was playing a bunch of games on the Amiga, that I realized that for me personally, storytelling was going to be most perfectly realized in gaming, and something that was interactive. On the trajectory, once I was working, eco was another standout moment, mainly because there was this beautiful concept about, a boy rescuing a girl, and at the core of the gameplay, that lives in this mechanic of literally holding her hand and pulling her through the environment. And so there was this realization then as well that gameplay can underwrite a narrative idea in a way that makes you understand it and feel it and respond to it in this much more living way. And so that was kind of profoundly influential.
What excites me about telling stories in games is that added layer of interactivity. We could be making web shorts or comic books or maybe movies, but I think there's a lot of really cool ways to tell a story that you can only tell in a story now. And there's a bunch of stories now, at least the ones that I'm interested in telling, that can only take place in a game.
I think one of the challenges in our young medium in terms of storytelling is kind of earning our narrative chops. A lot of games fall into the trap of kind of doing and-then storytelling, which is sort of something happens and something else happens and then. It's just a series of events, which isn't a story, right? A story, and this is sort of something I'm echoing from the guys that work on South Park, right? Is this idea that it has to have therefores and buts, right? That idea that stories are about reversals and complications and consequences, not just about a series of plot events that occur. And so I think as we mature as a medium, we're finding our feet as storytellers and learning about how, story and art is about surprise. It's about the unexpected, right? As opposed to feeling like, you set up a plot and it's gonna, get a step through the plot and end where you expect to end. It's all about that journey. And that's, if we do that right, ideally, this is the effect where people don't even want to put the controller down because they have to see what happens next. Just like when you're sort of sitting on the edge of your seat in a film, that's what we want to do with these games.
Story in game isn't necessary. I think you can have a lot of games that work just fine without stories, but for the kinds of experiences that I'm personally interested in, I think stories are a way to take the abstract world of a game, which, when you look under the hood, it's just a lot of, collision volumes and physics and triangles and, wave files and this very abstract computer thing, and to make it something that sort of bridges the gap a little more to the lived experiences that hopefully most of us have as human beings.
The audience in the last 20 years, I think, has, in many ways, a lot of it is growing up. Because you have people who were playing games 20 years ago who are still playing games today. They've grown up, and I think they're looking for a deeper experience, yet at the same time hoping to have as much fun and relaxation, and I just want to get stressed out when I'm playing a game. But I'm looking for a deeper experience. On top of that, you have all the new players who are coming in who don't have that. So it gets to be, I think, as the industry continues, you're going to find that the games themselves are going to get more diverse, because some of them are going to start catering to an older audience who's perhaps looking for a little more, and the others are still catering to the younger audience who wants to have a great experience as well that's more suited for them.
映画と小説とは違ってゲームはインタラクティブなメディアなんで、ストーリーテリングをいかにして、プレイヤーからその、一緒に、二人三脚でストーリーテリングするかっていうところは非常に難しいんですけど、そこが一番面白いところでですね、プレイヤーが、感じながらそれをストーリーテリングと、ゲームのプレイで並列に進んでいかないと、ストーリーが先に行ってもダメですし、プレイが先に行ってもダメなんで、そこの整合性をうまく結びつけながら、ストーリーの中にプレイヤーを溶け込ませることで、他のメディアではない、その没入感というのが、そういうのができますんで、そこに一番力を注いでゲームを作ってます。
For the longest time, I think in the storytelling medium, it was so much about knowing what your audience saw on the screen. The camera would frame something, you would get exactly the thought that you have in your head and the words that were written on paper through to the audience. And at that point, it was only left to the audience to basically realize whether or not they understood everything. In cinematic storytelling in games, the interactivity changes all of that. You don't know how they're going to perceive what you're writing because they might not interact the way that you expected them to. A scene might basically play out because it's a scene that's happening basically right around the player. They might just miss it because they might be looking at something else in the game world. And that's where like the boundaries, I've seen a lot of people come from the traditional cinematic side and not being able to kind of make that leap to the interactive side because they expect the player to do something just like they would expect the audience to do something, but oftentimes the player does something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been incredibly passionate about storytelling in games. That's part of what I think drew me to game making versus just game playing. And, when I think about sort of the games I first started playing, Day of the Tentacle was one of my first sort of more story-based games, and there were games like Myst. And I look at where we are today, particularly as you look at the indie game scene and VR and all of these opportunities, I think for telling story in different ways, it's amazing. Like, I think it's really started to inspire game developers to think about narrative in the games differently, and also to sort of embrace it. I think before it was always, let's make sure the story doesn't get in the way of the game, as opposed to thinking about how the story really amplifies the game experience. And today, there are a bunch of games out there that are just unapologetically narrative driven. And I think you see on the technology side sort of incredible advances in graphic fidelity and animation fidelity. And at the same time, you're seeing game developers really hone their craft as directors of performance.
I've been working in games for like 10 years now, 11, 12, too long. But something I found that I think is really cool is that at least over the past like 3 to 5, this chunk of time, the tool sets and just sort of like how to make a game has really flattened out. And you have like 2-person teams that don't have a dedicated coder making video games. You have 200-person teams that have obviously everything under the sun making games. But because the tool set is like standard-ish now, you have a more like diverse set of voices that feel like they can make a game. You have, again, like the one indie or the giant group and everything in between. And I think that's just a byproduct of like Unreal and Unity and tool sets just sort of being a solid paradigm. So once you learn one, you're like, oh, I can just do this now. Like it makes sense the same way like film got democratized with like digital cameras and nonlinear editors, you know, it's like, and I think that's really exciting. So whenever there's sort of a democratization of a medium, you get cool voices coming and talking in that. And I think games is there now. And I think we're like at the dawn of it. I think it's like the most exciting time, like right now, actually.